A mono blue aggro strategy. Fremin did win the flip, turn 1 Siren Storm Tamer. See if you can pair that with a Curious Obsession, though Keith's deck has a lot of pinpoint removal for that sort of thing.
Keith's removal includes Carnival Carnage. I watched him pick apart a white aggro player in an off-camera feature match earlier. The person thought it was Shock, and Jody was like, no, you take one. And the guy had a look on his face of like, just can't believe this is happening. So he's got Banefire, 3 Carnival Carnage, 4 Lava Coil, 2 Shock, along with 4 Goblin Chain Whirlers.
Yeah, despite that, Fremin does manage to hook up a Curious Obsession to a Merfolk Trickster. Notably, that's about the worst creature to put it on, as it's just an attacker on the ground.
Yep. I mean, even the Daredevil kind of matches up with it a little bit here. Interested to see if Keith has a removal spell, and if so, how he wants to time it, because trying to line up your removal the right way against mono blue aggro, against all the spell pierces and dives down is pretty tricky.
He does have a treasure map in hand, thinking about that's a pretty efficient turn mana-wise. You get to cast a map, scry once, but you're not doing anything about that Curious Trickster.
Yep.
You got to get that on lock. That is how mono blue wins a lot of its games, drawing all those extra cards.
Especially against a deck like Keith's, who's doing a lot of trading 1 for 1.
It's going to be Goblin Chain Whirler. That's a really effective blocker for a 3/3.
Yeah, that is just so much better than the creatures in the mono blue deck on the table, to say nothing of the enter battlefield trigger. I get that mono blue aggro, very well positioned deck. Alexander Hayne doing very well for himself, Magic Arena. But I sort of can't abide by the cards in this deck.
And speaking of the cards in this deck, this is something you don't often see. Fremin casts Tempest Shin, but he's not able to make an attack, and Curious Obsession demands that you're aggressive. No attack means you have to sacrifice it.
Yeah, this is the first time I've witnessed this weekend.
Yeah, same. I've had it come up a number of times, specifically Goblin Chain Whirler. That's the card that brick walls you when you have to do the Trickster thing, and it just feels really bad. And Keith is going to play that treasure map, and he's kind of stabilized the ground, though that Tempest Shin is a 5-power creature now.
Now, that was a really sharp play there from Keith. You can see that he has the Eldest Reborn in his hand. He played the map before making the land drop, trying to induce a Spell Pierce out of Fremin, and that would be a great spot to Spell Pierce. So, yeah. Keith, I think that's a really sharp play here. He knows he needs to bleed out a Spell Pierce if it's there to try to set up his expensive spells.
Yeah, no 5th land to get the Reborn online, though he does have Rekindling Phoenix. That's a really good check on that Tempest Shin. And Goblin Chain Whirler will come across. The life total is now Keith at 12 to Fremin at 16, and just an attack with the Mistcloak Herald. He can't punch through that Phoenix. Keith at 11. Mistcloak Herald, it's one of your cards you kind of lean on in matchups where your opponent does a lot of blocking, but it's just so mopey.
Yeah, it is. The problem with the card is that it is really bad.
That is the problem.
That is the problem. The problem with the card is that it's extremely bad. But you need to do some amount of this.
And here's the combo. Mistcloak Herald plus Curious Obsession. Gets to it connect. Keith's life total is kind of low. He's going to 9 here. You draw a card. There's another Herald, so that's a 3-turn clock. Keith does have a lot of presence on the battlefield, though. The Tempest Jin kind of checks the Phoenix on the way back, not to the extent that the Phoenix checks the Jin, though yeah, Keith doesn't have great attacks yet. Yeah,
Keith very much on the defensive right now. Does have the option of trying to flip the treasure map here on the upkeep and then go into his main phase with the treasure to try to cast one of these expensive spells. I'm sure that is not how Keith would prefer to do it. Try to leverage the extra cards, chain together some removal spells to pick apart the unblockable creatures. Not clear how much time he has, though.
Looks like he kept one on top with the map. He'll draw that, take another look. Goblin Chain Whirler in the holdings, though unfortunately that only checks 1 creature right now.
It may allow Keith to cobble together some good attacks this turn, though.
Yeah, that's definitely true. You get that point on the Tempest Shin, suddenly your Chain Whirler is free to attack. Treasure map does transform to Treasure Cove. Multiple copies of the Eldest Reborn in hand. That's a little slow here.
Yep. And, you know, Fremin has some spare parts to kind of work with here to sacrifice. I think that's also something that Keith would like to do here, is try to narrow down the battlefield a little bit so that the Eldest Reborn can actually take care of the critical creature.
Yeah, so that Chain Whirler bumped Fremin down to 10, and here's a big attack. Keith actually, considering just alpha striking, though, he's going to hang the Phoenix back, it looks like.
Yeah, the Tempest Jin just comes back across for too much there.
So there's going to be some blocks lined up. The Tempest does still get to eat that Direfleet Daredevil. Trickster is going to be eaten by the Chain Whirler, and here's Tempest on Rixmatty Reveler.
And, you know, any sort of trading off here is a big win for Keith. Again, he's trying to set up these Diabolic Edicts in his hand, so anything he gets off the battlefield is valuable, even if it costs him some of his creatures.
Life totals now, Keith at 9, Fremin at 8. Pretty close game here, and that Rekindling Phoenix still on tap. Though a Merfolk Trickster, that could bust this wide open. Land Trickster would be lethal here, in theory. Keith adds another Rixmatty Reveler. Discards one of those Eldritch Reborns to it. So there's the land. Gotta imagine if there was a Trickster, you'd be moving faster here.
Yeah. I mean, you can't win this game by blocking, so.
Just an attack with the Herald. Keith to 7. Fremin draws a card. Another island. 2 islands of the 3 cards in hand. Not great holdings. Keith's going to draw. Still has that second copy of the Eldritch Reborn in hand. Now the battlefield down to just 2 creatures for Fremin. It's looking a bit better now than it did before.
And the Eldritch Reborn here is a win-win. I mean, it doesn't matter what Fremin stacks. We don't even need to get that far here as Keith just attacks with everything and Fremin's going to let it go.
Yeah, cleans it up there. Keith up a game. This is a matchup where when you have access to all this efficient red removal, just knowing the matchup just informs the kind of hands you need to keep here. Keith has most of his stuff for this matchup in the main deck, right?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the issue is that his curve is not great. He's playing with a lot of 4s and 5s, and one of the ways to lose to mono blue aggro is you just get behind and they have spell pierces and negates for your more expensive stuff. Post board, Keith here has a Shock, a Drill Bit, 4 Duresses, 2 Fiery Cannonades, a Fight with Fire, 3 Legion War Boss, a Status Statue, and a Theater of Horrors. I like the Status Statue here. I like the Legion War Bosses, the Fiery Cannonades. Doesn't pair well with everything, but so good in the matchup. I could be talking the Duresses, too, try to lower the curve, interact a little bit.
Yeah, could be into that, especially because the best card in Fremin's sideboard, probably these 2 copies of Disdainful Stroke. Being able to get that out of the hand and start hitting your haymakers when it does come time to turn the corner can be a big deal. Also, sometimes just grabbing the Curious Obsession, that can bust up Fremin's hands.
Yeah, so on the other side here, we got 2 treasure maps, a Blink of the Eye, 2 sleep, 2 exclusion maze,
2 diamond mares,
2 negate, 2 disdainful stroke, 2 Jace Cunning Castaway. I mean, the anti-creature measure, even though Keith is playing with a lot of creatures, the anti-creature measures aren't very good here. Most of the creatures that Keith have, it's not about damage racing necessarily. Maybe you want the exclusion mages because Rekindling Phoenix is a problematic card. The rest of this, I think the treasure maps are fine here. The Jaces are fine here, but nothing great to bring in.
Jace Cunning Castaway is a card that I think tricked me a little bit when it was previewed. I thought, that's a 3-mana Planeswalker. It's probably pretty good.
You and everyone else.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have, I mean, to R&D's credit, they have, I think, gotten a lot of splash out of the history of 3-mana Planeswalkers. Even when they make ones that aren't particularly good, there's a sort of a tribal knowledge at this point of, they are better than they appear, even if they seem a little underpowered. Give them some time, and sometimes they don't actually kind of make it into constructed, even though they are the 3-mana ones have such a resume.
I think in terms of design, just good design, 3-mana Planeswalkers from this set are home runs.
Yes,
I like them a lot. I've actually been browned by Kaya a few times.
Well, and it's also just not sustainable to make every single Planeswalker generically a powerful card advantage battlefield sort of thing. Part of the range has to be they're situational and maybe also not that powerful. Like that has to be something that you do sometimes. And I think they did a very good job of it in the last set.
Some mana woes starting the game for Fremin here. Just 1 island through the 3rd turn. He does have some Heralds online, and one of them does have a Curious Obsession. Goblin Chain Whirler is about to take care of the other one, though. Keith in a fairly good position. Life total 16 to 17.
Yeah. And your opponent drawing 2 cards a turn is a lot less impactful when they can't play everything.
Right. Yeah, when you die with 7 cards in your hand, it's like getting Mind Twisted for 7.
I put it on the ledger. Every time I kill my opponent with cards left over in their hand, that
keep
goes
track
up.
all of them.
Oh, yeah. Admire my work.
We've had some Nexus of Fates players this weekend. They've been doing their tournament updates, and in parentheses, they track extra turns taken.
Right.
I think I'm going to do an update right for a tournament just to track cards my opponent lost the game with in hand.
Oh, it's great. I have done one tournament like that. It is a blast.
Things shaping up a little bit here. We see Rekindling Phoenix to go with the Chain Whirler and the Reveler for Keith. Reasonable position. He's at 10 life. Fremin has added Tempest Djinn and a Merfolk Trickster to the battlefield here. He's at 12.
It's good to remind yourself sometimes, you know what? You can't take it with you.
Yeah.
You know what I also really respect about Jody's deck here? You want to know something here? 2 Cinder Barons. No Rakdos Guildgate.
It's not a Rakdos deck. It's not worth doing.
Not even trying to bluff a guild thing on turn 1. Just playing with Cinder Barons. Love it.
I just play these colors. I'm not trying to swear allegiance to a guild.
No, I prefer to remain uncommitted.
There's been some attacking back and forth. Fremin's at 3, Keith's at 6. And this is kind of what the mono blue aggro does. This is actually one of the stronger elements, is that when you have Obsession going, you get to draw a bunch of chump blockers in these kind of games.
It's a very good chump blocking deck.
Here's an attack with a bunch of creatures. 2 of them are lethal, so Fremin's going to block them. Reveler is unchecked currently. As it stands, that's going to bump Fremin down to 1. Chain Whirler or Shock would be lethal from here. And those chump blockers, they want the way the chump blockers do. They're in the bin. And Fremin has a bit shy of lethal on the crack back. And your Siege Gang Commander, that one is not at all shy of lethal.
You are going to want to counter that. If you can counter that, you would want to counter that. All right.
It's better than every card in your deck, except the counter spell that takes it down. Fremin's going to draw here. A bunch of Spell Pierces in hand. Looks like a dive down. Those aren't going to do it.
No.
An attack for 2, get another look. Keith's at 4.
Keith's plan here of just tap out for high-quality creatures, play just 1 removal spell this game, so good against the mono-blue sideboard plan.
Fremin could tie the game with a Psionic Blast, but that's not lethal. And then Mind Twist for 6 for Jody Keith. 2-0 over Stephen Fremin. He'll advance to 11-2. In pretty good position in this tournament. Going into this round, we only had 2 players at X and 1.
And I think, you know, the first deck that we're seeing